Chayka puts his stake in the ground as more firings are announced in Leafland.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. We had some big news over the weekend when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. No, they did not name a head coach, but they did announce a couple more firings. John Chayka continues to be busy at work, reshaping what he wants the Toronto Maple Leafs to look like, both on the ice and off the ice. And we saw one longtime member of the organization part ways with the Maple Leafs. And then we saw another one who's been here for just a couple of years. But two Leafs assistant general managers, Brandon Pridhom and Clancy, officially out in Toronto. Dave, what'd you make of the news this weekend?
Yeah, I call it the continued cleansing of the Leafs, right? Of the front office.
Yeah. I mean, this is like Chayka kind of just putting his, digging in, putting his fingerprints on things. Where you look at Brandon Pridhom, he was a guy who was brought in by Brendan Shanahan way back when. He's been with the organization for 12 years, and then obviously worked his way. Started out as just like the team's capologist, and he was obviously known as a cap wizard through COVID, where the flat cap was really a problem, and he was able to kind of navigate that for the Maple Leafs. Worked his way up into the AGM role, was the existing co-GM along with Ryan Hardy prior to them hiring John Chayka. And then we find out that the Leafs decided that they were gonna go in a different direction. And Brandon Pridhom, who was, one of the longest serving members within the front office of the Maple Leafs, no longer with the team. And seems to be a lot of, I would say, split on this firing in particular. So Brandon Pridhom won, Clancy being the other AGM who was let go. We can dive into Clancy momentarily, but definitely Pridham was the headline guy. For many reasons. He's a big name, I think. There's not a lot of AGMs around the NHL that fan bases are keenly, in knowing of who they are. Pridham was a big name, I would say, in Leafland. And for a while, he was considered a big-time asset for this Maple Leafs organization. You think they're going to miss them? Like, what do you make of this firing?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like I can when we were talking about like potential moves, I thought maybe Pridham would have been a guy to stick around because his history with the team, how his reputation was. But then, just like talking to a few people, and it's like, yes, he had this reputation because of what he did with the salary cap and his work with the league of the salary cap. But like reputation and the reality that the Leafs, for I would say a good majority of their time, had always been like sweating out the salary cap. Mm-hmm. And we'd always talked about how the salary cap didn't exactly, like how the Leafs at times maybe I would say in some ways mismanaged, but in other ways kind of, they made the moves to sign all those guys. Then, yes, COVID did happen, so the flat cap didn't really help, and I'm sure that probably didn't help where Pridham's projections of the cap made it think they were going to go. But at the same time, when you always talk about what the Leafs management wasn't doing right, everyone talked about the cap. How many players they had to let go because they couldn't afford certain players because they were paying the high guys, right? They're paying the core four, right? They had to trade away contracts to make the core four work and giving up assets to make it happen too. That didn't happen as much, but there were some, like the Patrick Marleau one is like the first thing that comes to mind,
Yeah.
right? Like while I do think Pridham did a lot of good things here, it's also hard to overlook some of those things as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to really like land on how much of a say Brandon Pridham had in that stuff. Like, I think it's, you could also argue like, Brandon Pridham didn't make any of those signings or sign off on them, but when they needed a solution to their cap problems, that's when they went and sought after his expertise, and then he had to figure out, a way to make lemonade with lemons, and he did his best for a couple of years, but ultimately, much like the rest of the team, right? The Shannon plan didn't work, and he was a big member of that Shannon plan, was hired by Shanahan even before Kyle Dubas came into the organization. That's the misconception. A lot of people thought that Pridham was like Dubas's right-hand man. And remember when Dubas left to go to Pittsburgh, there was a lot of people who thought that Pridham was going to just leave and join him, much like we saw Jason Spezza do. Didn't happen. He was loyal to Brendan Shanahan. But after just 1 year of after Shanny gets let go by the organization, Pridham and the Maple Leafs decide to part ways as well. I you know what? I guess I shouldn't say I'm not shocked by this. I will say this: after I found out this obviously was happening, which was a weird way that this got broke, because it wasn't necessarily news that broke by any insider.
No.
If I'm not mistaken, Steve Simmons just wrote about him leaving in his Sunday Notes column, and then it just kind of took off from there, right? Like, this wasn't reported by anybody prior to that. Did you see anything from like Friedman or from Dreger or from
No?
Like, this was Steve Simmons, who apparently, doesn't have sources. No one talks to him. He had this scoop, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he just said like expect him to leave, which he ended up happening. Yeah, I'm sure that, and I think Steve also said that like when he interviewed for the GM role, like it wasn't a very great process for Pridham as well. Like it was like Pelly didn't really treat the process very well. It's very interesting how that kind of all played out. Like, if Keith Pelly really didn't like the job that Brandon Pridham was doing, why was Brandon Pridham allowed to stick around when Brad Treliving was let go? That's a head scratcher for me. Because okay, he probably just thought, okay, we just need somebody around until I decide who's going to come in. But I found that to be kind of interesting or weird. Maybe weird is probably a better way to describe it, just because it just kind of felt like Brandon, like at this point, just felt like Brandon Pridham was being, kept around until he probably even himself probably said, like, if there's not really a place for me to and how things are going to go, let's just, again, similar to the Brad Treliving sort of deal. If changes are coming and if more changes are happening, let me go and see what else I can do. And I'd be interested to see if he pops up in, I think, there's just Nashville's left now when it comes to a general manager spot.
Think so, yeah. Nashville's, still out there. I don't think that Pridham will be the general manager. Like you're saying, pop up in Nashville.
Well, I'd say maybe his name now gets thrown into there because maybe he wasn't available, or maybe the Leafs weren't making him available until during this time. We know now teams are very particular in who they allow to interview for positions.
Yeah, I don't know if there was much interest, outside of Toronto to bring in Pridham as the general manager, like the head guy. But I'd imagine he'll land somewhere if he wants to. Like, I think if he wants to stay in the game and end up, like, you don't think Dubas, could call and be like, hey, obviously we worked together before, and we were a good trio with you, me, and Spezza. Remember when Tavares scored the goal, the great celebration, and like it's a good memory that I think a lot of Leaf fans have.
Well, they came in together, like pretty much together.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Pridham was first, and Dubas wasn't far after.
Right. So I mean, wouldn't be surprised if he kind of sprouts back up in Pittsburgh or something. But I will say that one thing that I recall hearing now when John Chayka did his presser the other day after firing Craig Berube. I can't recall exactly the question he was asked, but he was referring to, I think someone had asked about what if he was making any more changes because Shane Doan had left. And I remember him saying, as of now, there have not been any more changes. And he named Ryan Hardy specifically when he said, Ryan Hardy's done a great job with the group and blah, blah, blah. He didn't mention Brandon Pridham, which I think is very notable at this point now. Like, I think then he knew that Pridham probably wasn't going to return to the team, and they just weren't quite ready to announce that. But just thinking back on it, I did clock that at the time where there was a co-GM, right? There were co-GMs, but he only laid out and propped up Ryan Hardy, who is still around as of now, whereas Pridham no longer with the team. Will he land elsewhere? I think he will. I think he's a bright guy. Maybe not ready to take on a general manager role quite yet, but I think he certainly can fill some role in a front office if he wants to. This season. Derek Clancy is the other guy who was let go. The other AGM let go by Toronto this weekend. Let's get into that news as well. So that's next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's show is brought to you by Kalshi. The hunt for the Stanley Cup playoffs continues, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. On Kalshi, you can trade every single playoff game, every series, the conference finals, and the championship. We got Game 7, Montreal, Buffalo. Currently, Montreal is seen as the underdog at 48% versus Buffalo, who are trading at 53%. So, meaning a $100 bet on Montreal to win would actually pay out $189 if they go out to win the series. So, as the playoffs heat up, those numbers move in real time, and you can buy in or out at any time. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi. Kalshi, trade on anything. Today's show is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. You're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you, as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, with brand new episodes of the Locked On Leafs podcast, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube as well. Hit subscribe and get that daily dose of Maple Leafs content. Happy May 2 to everybody, by the way. If everyone up here in Canada is listening, I think it's what, President's Day weekend down in the States. I think that's kind of what the overlap is. They have a long weekend as well. I can't recall, President's Day or something like that. But shout out to everyone enjoying their long weekend here today on Monday. But it was a busy weekend for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They let go of 2 assistant general managers as part of a house cleaning, which we fully expected the Maple Leafs to kind of do. Like, first, obviously, we saw them get rid of Craig Berube and Shane Doan, and Brandon Pridham and Derek Clancy were added to that list of off-ice members who have now exited the organization. Derek Clancy's one that was not necessarily a surprise to many. Like, this is a guy who was brought in by Brad Treliving a couple of years ago. And he was a tree guy. He was he the assistant general manager, who's like player personnel. Yeah. So what I see here, his primary role was to evaluate players around the league as another set of eyes. Went back into their ECHL days. Wasn't a surprise to see Chayka, let go of Derek Clancy. So that was the other big news that obviously happened over the weekend. Pridham, took up a lot of the oxygen, but it's 2 assistant general managers that the Maple Leafs did decide to move on from this weekend. You think that's it, Dave, or do you think there's still some more moves to come as Chayka and Sundin kind of reshape this organization?
Yeah, I was just about to kind of look at the Leafs front office. Like, I don't see Haley Wickenheiser going anywhere.
No. You would think that if they were going to get rid of any more like assistant general man, like they would have done an all at once.
Yeah.
Right? Like you would think.
And if you're doing sweeping changes throughout the organization, it'd be weird to do, okay, we're going to get rid of these 2 people. Maybe next week we'll look at these other people. Like, you're going to be letting people go, and if you're doing a full like sweep, you're probably going to do more. Like, again, Haley Wickenheiser, I didn't see her leaving because I think they really value, and I know Keith Pelly really valued her role. Daryl Metcalf, we know his involvement with analytics and stuff.
Yeah.
Seems like they would really value what he has. And we already talked about Ryan Hardy, him getting the shout out. Other than that, maybe scouting, but Mark Leach was just brought in, and that was a big addition for them to go out and get him. Curtis McElhinney, like the goaltending and development scouting.
I think you got to be happy with the goaltending and how things have developed over the last couple of years, I guess. Although McElhinney, no, who was there before? It wasn't McElhinney.
Curtis Sanford was the goaltending coach. It's different positions because he's Sanford's part of the coaching staff. McElhinney is like part of the front office, kind of overseeing the whole goaltending department.
Oh yes, this new role that's kind of popping up a little bit here.
Maybe that's one of those. Do we really need that? I mean, goaltending is important in the NHL. We know that, but I don't know many organizations that have a goaltending director.
Yeah, well, there's a few. I think that's becoming more and more popular. We'll say because. I mean, who knows goalies better than goalies themselves? So I think it does help. Like, I know Luongo in Florida, kind of took on that role. And, there's been a couple others around the league that have kind of done this. But, Toronto, they can throw around money. So they might as well try and have a goaltending department if they can. But, yeah, it could very well be it for, like, big names that get let go. I think we're probably going to be keeping these same AGMs. I would imagine at some point we'll see an addition. Like John Chayka's got to have some friends in the league, some colleagues that he trusts, that he wants to work with, that he'll probably end up bringing over, much like we saw Derek Clancy come over with Brad Treliving back in 2023. And, like we saw Spezza leave and go with Dubas when they went to Pittsburgh. I would imagine that, there's got to be a guy out there somewhere that Chayka respects and wants to bring in, or maybe it's, a numbers guru, who works for like his family's analytics firm, maybe to bring him into the fold. I would imagine at this point, the teardown, we'll call it, of the front office, I would think is done at this point. Like, you let go of an advisor, a coach, and 2 AGMs. That's pretty big changes
Yep.
within, your first week, really, week and a half of being the general manager of the hockey team. So I think at this point, it's probably it for the mass exodus. Now I would think that he's looking to add. I don't know how many people he's going to be looking to add to the organization, but that's what I think would at this point be kind of the next steps here for Chayka.
Yeah, I mean he's got Matt Sundin in the fold too. Let's not forget,
Yeah.
right? So like he's
Well, there was rumors that Gary Roberts and Ty
Yep.
Domi and like some of these someone who could take over that Shane Doan type of role.
Yeah.
Is there someone that he worked with closely when he was in Anaheim or when he was in Arizona that he'd like to bring into the fold as an AGM or bring him in as like an assistant player personnel type of role of some kind? I'd imagine so.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure Roberts would be a big coup for them.
Yeah.
Probably. Now, like, I'm curious to see where that would exactly go because, like, does that kind of fit into where Wickenheiser is and player development, right? That's kind of where he's done a lot of his work, right, in developing players and nutrition and all that stuff. So I'm curious to see how that kind of would potentially work in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I totally expect them to make additions. And look, the coaching staff, we don't know who the next coach is going to be yet. We don't know. Like, that's probably another area where you're probably going to see some people move around. Although maybe Steve Sullivan kind of sticks around because there's a relationship with Steve Sullivan and John Chayka from their time with Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be someone that sticks around and maybe even gets, Sullivan gets a different role unless he wants to be remain on the coaching staff. But yeah, I'm looking, like, I'm just kind of looking. I mean, good Lord, there's so many people on this list.
I know.
I don't see an obvious one where I'm like, do they need to rethink? Because I think like some of these guys have been even there before Shanahan. Like there are some guys, there's still some holdovers.
Yeah,
I'm
sure there's
there.
pro scouts and some other guys who've been around the organization forever that maybe they might want to make some changes, like some serious behind the scenes level stuff. But in terms of like big names, I don't know if I expect to see any of the big names at least get let go at this point. It's funny you bring up the coach. Let's take a break. Let's come back and talk about kind of where things stand with the coaching search. There was one big name that was brought up this weekend. I want to get your thoughts on that report. And the Marlies, game 2 in the books, game 3 coming up on Wednesday. We'll get into a little bit of some Marlies talk as well. That's next in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Quo. Missed calls and slow follow-ups are silent killers for businesses. That's how money gets left on the table without people even realizing it. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the business communication system built so you never miss a call. Quo helps businesses keep every conversation organized by letting your entire team manage calls and texts from one shared number. No more drop messages, missed opportunities, or disconnected communication. It's designed for how modern businesses actually operate. The part I love, everything lives in one clean thread. Calls, texts, voicemails. The whole team sees the whole conversation, so nothing will fall through the cracks. And the AI summaries have serious time by logging calls, highlighting the next steps automatically. It just makes your business feel more organized and responsive. Money is on the line. Always say hello with Quo. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's quo.com/lockedonnhl. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you. Saw a report yesterday, Dave, in 32 Thoughts or a couple days ago, whenever it was put out there. Bruce Cassidy is obviously the big name that's out there still in the coaching ranks. That there are a lot of Maple Leaf fans hoping that that is the direction that the Leafs go in. Doesn't sound like that's going to be likely, though. Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts pretty much came out and said he'd be surprised if Bruce Cassidy was named the next head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Does that report surprise you at all?
No, because like when you think about Bruce Cassidy, you know, he's in a first off, he's in a weird position right now because two teams have attempted to try to get him in the fold, and the Golden Knights were like, not right now, which is just a douche move, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
like it's just bizarre. But I think where I don't see the fit with Cassidy per se is Cassidy has worked with teams that are like primed and ready to go to be like pretty much no doubt contenders. You know, when he got to Vegas, you know, missed out on their chance to win a cup, but they were seen as a team that was like knocking on the door, and he gave them kind of that extra push they needed to get there. Boston, they were seen as a team that were kind of, you know, right there. He didn't get them he didn't get them a cup, but like got them pretty close, right? He's more of that type of coach rather than we want to work with a younger team or like in a team that's kind of in a bit of a retool transition. It just seems like a team like the Leafs, and as Friedman says, they want to go with a bit more of a fresh, different perspective. So maybe not I hate to say this word, but like we hear it a lot, like the recycled, obvious coaching candidates. I think they want to do something a little more new.
Yeah, I think that's why like Manny Malhotra's name, you know, gets brought
Friedman's
up.
been big on the Malhotra train. Like that was like the first name he brought up.
It's just whether or not, you know, the Canucks want to keep him in the organization, I suppose, right?
Well, if the new presidents and wait, are they presidents? Henrik and Daniel?
The co-presidents. Yeah, co-presidents.
That's crazy.
Henrik and Daniel Sedin, former teammates of Manny Malhotra.
Yeah, like, and Ryan Johnson, who was his age, he was his GM from the AHL. Like, man, like that's gonna be tough. Like, Adam Foote's been there only 1 year, and it's like, yeah, sorry, dog, pull and shoot. I mean,
I'll be honest, Vancouver would be smart to do that. I think they would be. Yeah, he's not because Adam Foote was on the bench under Tocchet, and they elevated Adam Foote.
Yeah,
so Foote's been there a couple of years, so like they know what Foote's all about as a coach. And Tocchet left, and they're like, "Well, what are we gonna do? Well, let's throw Adam Foote up at the head coach and see what happens." Well, they were the worst team in the NHL, so I think Manny Malhotra, like they'd be smart to try and keep him in the fold by giving him an NHL job, promoting him up to the big club. But it's interesting, like, would they be able to block him from interviewing with Toronto if he's with the AHL? Because I believe
my understanding is the Canucks hired him.
Yes.
So he's working with the Canucks. But generally teams have been kind of limited to blocking for promotions. Right.
But if they're going to promote him,
then they'll basically have to pretty much say, like, the Leafs are going to have to ask for permission because he's under contract with Vancouver, right? They can't just be like, "Oh yeah, Vancouver, we talked to your guy, he's coming over." Like, that's not how that works.
Yeah,
it's going to be, hey, you know, we think we view him as a candidate. We want to know if we can, you know, have a conversation with him, or talk to the agent of Manny Malhotra, and he'll have to ask the team for permission. In some ways, the Leafs are going to have to it's tipping their hand a little bit, but at the same time, the Canucks are going to also have to tip their hand more so. They're going to have to make a decision now because it's gonna happen. Like Malhotra's name is going to be out there.
He's a head coach in waiting at this point.
Yeah.
Like I think at some point a team's going to want to give him a shot. Maybe it's Toronto, maybe it's another team out there. Who knows? Maybe it's Vancouver that wants to bring him up into, up into the main club to kind of block Toronto from having that opportunity, or any other team from having that opportunity. But that's, it does seem to be a name that's picking up some steam. Whether or not it's possible, I guess we'll find out. David Carl is a name that I keep seeing get brought up time and time again from the University of Denver in the NCAA. Whether or not he wants to make the jump to the NHL, to the Leafs want to give him that type of role with his first NHL role. I don't know. Might be a lot to ask of a guy like David Carl. So it does feel like they're going to cast a wide net, as they said in the press conference. They're going to, do their due diligence and speak to a number of coaching candidates, but there doesn't seem to be a large list of guys that make a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Like, it does feel as though there's only like 2 or 3 candidates that maybe actually fit with what the Maple Leafs are looking to do moving forward. Like, do you feel that, or am I kind of on an island thinking that?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's Chayka was when they were asking him like what type of style and like what type of coach, like he was very, he didn't want to, and he even said himself, I don't want to give away like exactly what we're looking for, because then you're gonna have like, they're gonna put a wide net. And a bunch of coaches are going to be like, well, I don't think my style fits what you're looking for.
Yeah, but what's the point of that? Like, if you know what you want, you know how you want to play, like, streamline your process. Like, what?
The only thing I can think of is if, there's something they haven't considered that a coaching candidate can say. Because, like, you heard Peter Laviolette on, I don't know if you heard his interview with the guys over at the Leaf. Yeah. And he says, like, he interviewed, I think he had like 12 interviews and 8 times he got the job.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, that's a pretty high
hit
rate of like hiring, if I'm going to be honest there. Like, you probably, there's probably something that a coach can say that's like, okay, we didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Right? Something like that can happen. But I do agree that they probably know who they want. But they also know that if option A doesn't turn out and option B could be a maybe, they got to have some other, they have to at least say that they went down the road of having different things potentially lined up. I guess that's one way to look at it probably. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think, the Leafs said they went on this big thing with the search firm, casting a wide net, and they went with the most unobvious general manager candidate we could ever see.
Yeah, they landed with John Chayka, right? Where it's like, when people put together their long list when Tree Living was first fired, right? And they're jotting down notes. Chayka was not a guy that a lot of people had on their radar. That name popped up pretty late, and he ended up getting the job. And he now is tasked with finding the next head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. What he decides to do, I guess we'll find out hopefully soon. I hope this doesn't drag out too long. I mean, they got to get going with some meetings. You want to obviously figure out how you want to play. Start with your free agent meetings, your draft meetings, and have the coach kind of be involved in a lot of those conversations, I would imagine. So, especially now that you have the number 1 overall pick, feels like that player is going to factor into the season, and whoever you choose as the coach will,
Well, and Auston Matthews, you're going to have a meeting with him, and he's going to be like, oh, and who's coaching, by the way?
Yeah, there's that too. Well, not only that, but like, yeah, whatever free agents you're going to talk to this, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on, and that's got to be next on the to-do list here is to figure out the coaching situation for John Chayka and company. Um, so we'll see what happens there. The Marlies, though, the Marlies, through 2 games of round 3, it is tied 1-1 with the Cleveland Monsters. They won game 1 and then lost game 2, 3-1. Game 3 will be in Toronto on Wednesday for game 3. So, I mean, this is good for the Marlies. I think it's just great overall for a lot of these young players to be getting, some deep playoff experience. That's only going to help the Maple Leafs, I think, and their development system. The more action that these young kids kind of see, and guys like Easton Cowan who's starting to kind of figure it out. Bo Grew now finally with a couple of goals here in the postseason. He's getting going again. I've heard some good things about Noah Chadwick and the way he's played on the blue line. William Villanova's putting up some big points. So a lot of young players who are going to want to show out for the new general manager and the new staff that is, here in Toronto or going to be brought into Toronto. So I think that this is really beneficial for a lot of guys on the Marlies. So game 3 of that game of that series goes down Wednesday in Toronto. All right, Dave, I think that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.